I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Esther Dyson, an investor, journalist, author, businesswoman, commentator, and philanthropist. She's a leading angel investor focused on healthcare, open government, digital technology, biotech, and outer space. The founder of Wellville, a 10-year project to show the long-term value of investing in health, and is active on the board of several startups. Esther has a BA in economics from Harvard and was founding chairman of ICANN from 1998 to 2000, and has served as a trustee of organizations including Glasses for Humanity, Bridges.org, the National Endowment for Democracy, the Eurasia Foundation, Stop Badware, the Sunlight Foundation, Charity Navigator, Expand Ed Schools, and the Long Now Foundation. These are just a few of her many professional endeavors and achievements. So Esther, welcome. It is truly a pleasure and honor to have you with me today. We're talking about a new book project of yours called Term Limits, a design for living in the age of AI. So I want to start out by asking you for an overview of the idea. What inspired you to work on this concept?
A whole lot of things, of course, and that's kind of the point. Term limits is not this thing. It's a lens for looking at everything. So at the end of last year, actually December 42nd or something, my 10-year project, Wellville, ended as planned. And I got a lot of, oh my gosh, it ended. What happened? Or, well, if you don't want to talk about it, and it's like, no, it was a project. It wasn't supposed to hang on forever. And I began to think, as I've noticed before, how many things sort of they begin with a mission, and then their mission becomes their own perpetuation rather than whatever it was they were trying to achieve. And this is also around the time that Biden was slowly resigning, and then there was Jimmy Carter's death, and there was, oh my God, he died. No, celebrate his life. He was over 100. That wasn't a tragedy. And there's so many things. And I began to realize we're living in this age of human beings. There's longevity billionaires who want to live forever. There's exponential growth. There are VCs who, you know, just keep wanting exits. And so term limits, the whole point of term limits is it's not, there's no single rule, but things should have a defined time. Some things are too short, like most investment vehicles. They should think about the long term. We should invest in childcare so that adults will be healthy. And then other things, once I'm here, I want to stay forever. Or if it's good, we must need more of it, as opposed to if it's good, let's get the right amount. So it's basically that overall concept, and then thinking about how to apply it to specific things.
Well, you sent me over notes, a really lengthy draft of
Yes,
notes for what you're
too
putting
long.
together. No, it was absolutely wonderful. And this is a project that you were working on, so it's going to be a while before we see this in bookstores. But
Yes,
what excited me about it was so many of the ideas you've touched on there are so relevant to right now, what we're going through today. And you had written in there that the goal of term limits was not to give people 10 timely tips, but instead to offer them a lens that they could use to see their place in the world as well as others. And the notion of term limits reflects this need for an anchor in the world of infinity. I really loved that idea, as well as helping people set priorities. And so one of the takeaways that I had from reading through your notes was we live in a world of infinite possibilities, right? I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is we're in a century where we have more and more possibilities and opportunities than ever before, but we still have finite lives. And it seems like that was one of the things that you were addressing in this.
exactly. And I'm looking forward to doing that and to doing it here in brief in the term limits we have on this podcast.
Well, So I want to get into your background briefly. I
Okay.
mean, you showcase this world of infinite possibilities. Your own life has been immersed in science and technology for decades, and you have done tremendous work as a tech analyst and investor, founder of the Wellville project. You lived in Star City in Russia, and there are bios of you like on prestigious tech sites, the Allen Institute, Long Now Foundation, Edge.org, Arthur C. Clarke Foundation site, and so many more. I was reading these and I was absolutely blown away. So you have really been on the cutting edge of science and technology, right?
Yep. As what I like to call a court jester. I have no official standing, not an institution, but I speak to power, and I'm also discreet, so they tell me the truth.
Well, I'm not sure if there is anyone who has a right to an official position these days. Things are changing so rapidly,
Yes.
right? So
Yep.
I think we're all just kind of hanging on the edge of our seats and waiting to see how things go.
Yeah. And we need to think long term and see what's going to stick, and what we have to consider is strictly temporary.
I wanted to drop a quote from Mark Twain. He said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes." And that, over the last couple of months, has been coming into my head more and more. So I am pushing 50, and I'm becoming far more aware of past trends repeating themselves
Hmm.
with new names, right? When I was a kid, I thought it was like bell bottoms making a comeback, but it seems like everything that human beings do just gets kind of, what do they call it? Reboots in Hollywood, right? So we keep rebooting social trends as well.
Hmm.
Um, but we also have some fundamentally new technologies occurring, like human level AI. I think we're close to that. And that could be a groundbreaking change. I'm wondering what some of the biggest changes that you see are in the near future. And do you have any thoughts on things that we might want to ignore? Because again, it's like bell bottoms, it's just going to keep coming back every 20
Yeah.
years.
Well, human nature is going to keep coming back, and it's everything happens in response to what else is going on around it. I mean, right now we have in the U.S., I would say there's a lot rhyming with Russia, which gave me an amazing perspective on the United States, not just currently, but also the cycles of addiction, the 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 susceptibility to corruption, that kind of thing. But what's going to stay the same in some sense is the human need to be human, to connect with other humans. And when you say AI is becoming human like, that's in the perception of human beings.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot longer before AIs actually, I mean, you know, people are physical things. And one of my favorite science fiction stories talks about the Borgs looking at the people on Earth and saying, they think with their meat. Yeah, that's kind of weird, right? I mean, things electronically think, but they don't quite feel. And I'll get to this later about fitness landscapes and so forth. But what's changing is indeed the simply the vastness, the exponential growth, size, whatever. There's more to deal with than a human being can handle. And you have this movie, Her. The guy falls in love with his robot, his operating system, they call it Samantha. And he discovers he wants some reasonable percentage of her time. He wants her attention. And she's got his attention. And then she discovers she's got 1,500 other lovers. She's talking to them simultaneously. And he wants a meaningful percentage. They're at a completely different time scale, a completely different scale of attention. And he realizes there's no real connection. Everything he fancied was kind of a hallucination. So we're living in this world where it's so easy to hallucinate. And I want to work with the people I know, but if I'm doing good, I'm in the United States, but the people in Syria, forget Gaza and the Congo and so forth. I I want to be an influencer, and someone else has 10 times as many followers as I do, and there's just everything needs to be bigger and larger,
Yeah.
and what we need to see is we exist as a finite life in an infinite universe, and understand that when I talk about term limits, it's not just the term limits, it's not just barriers, but it's also connections. And your term limits ask you consider your past, and then consider what you leave to the next generation, or the next person who's going to take your job, or the next person who's going to help finish your project. And for a corporate audience, consider you're the CEO of the company, and imagine something happens to you, you disappear, you get run over by a bus, whatever. You don't want the stock to go up. That means, oh my gosh, people are so glad I'm gone, they're going to replace me with someone better. But you also don't want the stock to go down, because that means you left behind a mess.
Yeah.
And your goal is to do something great within those term limits that you have, and feel satisfied and happy with that. It also gives you, if you can do anything and you have time to do anything, there are no deadlines, and it's too big. So understanding those term limits and seeing them as something to hold on to rather than something that constrains you.
Well, if it's okay, I want to jump. I had a couple of questions on
Mhm.
companies. I
Sure.
want to jump into my second one because I think this dovetails into what you said about influencers, right? And I mean, I do a podcast, and it is easy to fall into this trap of I want, more audience, more listens, more
Yes.
views. And, I do that myself. And then every now and then I stop and think, you know what? I want to have thoughtful conversations. That's why I
Yes.
started doing this. And that relates for me to corporate America because there is this pressure for increasing stock price that forces companies out of their niche.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've noticed. So for me, the big example is the big five tech companies: Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Microsoft. Both Apple and Amazon have gotten into music and making Hollywood films. All of these
Yes.
companies are into virtual reality. The one that really surprised me was home automation. All five got into home automation a few years ago. I think it was a little bit early. They all rolled out competing products at the same time. And the thing that struck me about that was this is really outside of the core specialization
Hmm.
for any of these companies. So is that a concern, I guess? Again, in terms of term limits, this relentless drive for growth and stock price, forcing them to expand outside of what they're good at.
Yeah, I will answer, but I'll just give it a little. I was at a board meeting 2 weeks ago, and I won't say who it was, but the IR guy was saying, we're not trying to get the stock price to go up. We're trying to reduce the volatility. And I thought, bless you, you know, because I don't want to get overpriced or underpriced, but just we don't want people to be too surprised, because we want them to know the truth and invest in us at a fair price. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of antitrust and Lena Khan, and just the market should be efficient and competitive, but you don't want winner takes all. And
Yeah.
again, this idea of term limits is, I'll do the music, I'll do the books, you do the home automation, whether it's in a huge marketplace or whether it's in a small community where the little nonprofits tend to compete against one another for short-term grants. And companies try to dominate every market when actually they should really focus on what they're good. I like to say density beats scale. If you're dense, you're going to serve that market very well. If you spread yourself too thin, you'll eventually end up in trouble. And
Mm.
we've seen, I mean, General Electric was a great example of that. There's many, many others.
Yeah. Yeah, there are so many. I mean, in my own career experience, I've seen this where companies they feel this pressure to diversify and expand, and before you know it, they're in areas that are so far outside of what they're known for that it just gets very tenuous. Now, you did write on nonprofits. I thought this was interesting because, as you mentioned, you just wrapped up 10 years on Wellville. And one of the focus areas that you're writing about was eliminating problems rather than simply addressing them and having a term limit for nonprofits, being able to say, look, here's the problem we were trying to solve. We've solved it, or we've at least made the inroads that we were able to do. It is time for this nonprofit to be put to rest. And then who knows, maybe in the future, another comes along that is more tailored to that changing problem, right?
Yeah. Or again, if you invest in the, not so much in the solution, I have this big argument in healthcare in general. You know, most healthcare is a repair business. And what we really should be is in the maintenance business, keeping people healthy rather than waiting until they get really sick and then it's more lucrative. The, for example, diabetes prevention is usually not paid for by Medicaid, and diabetes treatment is. So, you know, wait until the person gets sick enough and then we'll try and treat them, which is a lot more expensive and a lot more lucrative for the healthcare system. And whether it's lucrative for the healthcare system or sort of something that philanthropy can keep addressing, much better to not so much prevent it, but help people build and maintain their own resilience so that they don't succumb to whatever it is. I mean, that's certainly true about addiction. You know,
Yeah.
yes, you should treat people who have problems with substance abuse, but it would be so much better if they never succumbed in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's a tremendous part of our society. I mean, like especially in terms of food and nutrition and
Yes.
exercise and things like that. And I think it's one of those things where for a lot of folks, just because society, it's easy to go along with the flow, right? It's easy to just skip exercising. It's easy to eat fast food instead of healthy food, And what I've seen is a lot of folks, when they get into middle age, there's usually some kind of a shot across the bow where the doctor says, hey, it's
Yep.
time to change, right? So,
Yeah. And then it's really hard.
yeah. Well, do you think there's a pressure for nonprofits? I'm trying to outline this without mentioning any names because there are a
Yeah.
couple of really big ones. But one thing I've seen is nonprofits that are focused on awareness get more attention, right? Because they are out there marketing and promoting,
Marketing.
running
Yes.
advertisements, they've got billboards. So they get more attention and then more donations than nonprofits that are focused on just quietly solving the problem. I'm wondering, do you think that there's kind of a social Darwinism or a social evolutionary pressure away from problem solving in the nonprofit sector?
Um, Basically, yes. I mean, I think, I'm a big fan of disclosure. What are the ingredients? And I'm on the board of Charity Navigator, and our our mission, in a sense, is to assess the impact. And the simplest thing to do is just to look at their official filings. How much did they spend on actually delivering whatever it is they're delivering versus how much they spend on internal administration and overhead? Uh, and how much did they spend on marketing? That's what I'd really like to know. And I mean, those numbers are so. The challenge with philanthropy is because your customer is not the one paying, it's hard to understand what the value is, let alone the actual impact. The value is what people will pay. The impact is sort of the counterfactual of what it improves over the next 20 or 30 years. And dealing with all that is complicated. But just having, I think everything you buy, whether it's a donation to charity or food in the grocery store or a dress or something, it would be great if it just said, we spent this amount of money marketing to you.
Yeah.
And then we spent this amount of money adding sugar that would make you want it more. I mean, it's complicated, but people don't understand ultimately the business motivations behind the people they're dealing with, whether it's a company or an individual. Are are they getting your attention to sell advertising, so they're going to give you all kinds of stuff for free? Are they selling you food that tastes good because they know you'll eat too much of it, and so forth and so on? And so these problems present, or challenges, let's call them, present differently in philanthropy from for profit. And in philanthropy, there's also tax policies that have an impact. There are donor advised funds where you can put the money in and get the tax benefit, and then kind of the money just sticks around. I mean, right now, there are a lot of people who are going to go without health care, food, whatever, because of
Yeah.
some of the disruptions in the government. And I think it was Rockefeller or Ford. Somebody said, we're going to raise our rate of spending down above 5% is what's required by law, not always enforced. And they're going to raise it. And, the question is, what's the purpose of keeping this money for 20 years if you could invest it now in fixing problems they're not just short-term problems. There are people losing their jobs. There's kids losing childcare, where you'll actually have a much bigger impact if you spend it now than if you wait. The theory is, well, I'll wait and let the funds increase and accumulate and spend it later. But this is a case where spending it now is actually the right thing to do.
Well, this takes us into the realm of government, and you've written on term limits for bureaucrats and technocrats.
Yes.
That was my word. But in the last month alone, tens of thousands of bureaucrats have been let go by a person you've described as an unelected businessman, and there have been discussions of closing down entire federal agencies.
Yeah.
And I think, there's on the face of it, I guess, and people will either be for or against this. But then I think that this goes to a much larger issue. Should there be term limits on bureaucratic institutions to prevent bloat, stagnation, regulatory capture, and other concerns?
There should be, how shall I say, there shouldn't be term limits on the institutions themselves, most likely. I mean, like the Department of Education or the military. But there should definitely be, if you like, reassessments. For example, I was on the board of the Long Now Foundation, which is dedicated to long-term thinking. This is the year 02025, so they think 10,000 years. And after a quarter century, we all decided, time not to close down the organization, but to refresh the leadership, reassess the mission. And so I'm no longer on the board, which I think is entirely appropriate. I'm also thinking, some institutions and even organizations, which are kind of the things that implement the institutional frameworks, do deserve to have themselves to be renewed, but with term limits for the people, reassessment of what is our mission, how are we fulfilling it, and so forth and so on. More specifically, there is a lot of bloat, and there's an undersupply of effective technology in most of our government organizations. And what disturbs me is they're throwing out a lot of babies with that bathwater.
Yeah.
And it's the question of not does this thing need a refresh, but how does it need a refresh? What as with everything, what part of it should live on? It's like, yes, you're a caterpillar, turn into a butterfly, but you know, don't kill the caterpillar making that transformation. And so, and some things should be quietly put to sleep, but yeah, and people in particular, I think death is an appropriate part of life. And that's what makes humans different versus AI and institutions. Some of them can indeed live, if not forever, certainly beyond the lifetime of any human being.
Well, you mentioned death. I wanted to ask if there are term limits on identity. And this comes on the heels of something I read about programming AI with the knowledge as well as the response
Yeah,
patterns of the folks they mentioned were like Albert Einstein was one of them, but
yeah, yeah.
Thomas Jefferson I think may have been another. And the idea was to resurrect these folks in virtual form. And as I thought about that, on the one hand, yes, we would benefit from the wisdom of these figures, right?
Hmm.
I mean, Einstein's scientific knowledge or Jefferson's foresight about freedom
Hmm.
and self determination, and that I think in a more general sense, I think it would be reassuring for all of us to be able to have loved ones with us that have passed, right? But on the other hand, these are digital ghosts. They are not
Yes,
living
yeah,
beings. And they also represent a time and a view of the world that has come and gone. Should we let them rest?
right. So I, I mean, I don't think they're there to for us to let them rest. That's kind of the point. And here again, it's a complicated and a very good question. So, but just to start, one of the most horrifying emails, marketing email I got recently was, we have this wonderful app. You can, you know, give it to your grandpa and have him talk to it, and it will save you the time of talking to him yourself. But when he's gone, you can talk to the app. And forgive me, I found that horrifying. Uh, because there's something in your grandpa that is real because he feels. And there
Yeah.
is something in the app that is not real. And it's, I mean, have a picture of your grandpa, have something that talks like your grandpa, but don't don't create it in a way that would ever falling in love with something that isn't real carries this inevitable disappointment of discovering that they're not real. And there's so many stories about people finding out the truth, and it's better to know the truth rather than to be deceived or even to deceive yourself. So, sure, have an Einstein bot that pretends to be Einstein, but it's not, and we should be aware of that. There's no problem with doing it. It's not evil, but the moment it becomes deceptive or illusory, it it's deceptive and illusory. There's no two ways about it.
And that takes me right back to what you said about the movie Her earlier, right? Where he anthropomorphized it and realized later that he was projecting far too much into it compared to what it actually was. And I think on a more mundane level, like I find myself apologizing to Siri on my phone quite often, and I'm in some ways I feel ambivalent about that. On the one hand,
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, I'm
you
directing
have good
emotional
manners.
energy, yeah, but on the other hand, I think, well, the way that we treat machines does reflect us, so I guess it probably is
Yes.
good ultimately. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's what you're doing, and you're basically modeling a behavior pattern, which is to be polite, and that's fine. I mean, it's, again, we should get excited about things that are real problems,
Yeah.
which are when somebody's deluded and is looking for love from something that doesn't give it. And it keeps them, I mean, this is the big problem of all the social media. It keeps them from actually spending time with the people they love. The, this whole word, people consume social media. People are not something for one to consume. People are something for one to communicate with. Way back when, talking about AI, there was this guy, David Waltz, and he said, words are not in themselves carriers of meaning, but pointers to shared understanding.
Mm.
And if the thing on the other side doesn't share your understanding, the words are meaningless, because what you're trying to do is get a response in someone else's actual brain and personality that understands. One of my favorite semi jokes is, what's the hardest sentence in the English language to truly understand? Let's have lunch. I mean, are they blowing you off? Are they trying to make a date? Do they want to sell you a piece of real estate? It's, the words themselves are meaningless. It's that shared context of, this guy's a real estate agent and I'm actually looking for an apartment.
Well, and that shared context, I think, is something that we are definitely at risk of losing just because we have such a separation of society. And this reminds me of what you've done with Wellville. I didn't go into that in the questions, but you have done tremendous boots on the ground work helping struggling communities. That was the entire point of it. And as I was reading through the website, you handpicked a number of communities that truly needed help and put programs in place to provide resources to improve people's lives. Again, boots on the ground, real world. This is, I viewed this as the Maslow's pyramid stuff. We were trying to get the fundamentals in place and not worrying about, digital identity issues.
Right. Um, all true with we didn't go in and give them programs. We went in and said, what are you trying? I mean, obviously we went in with some knowledge and connections, but the whole point was, what are you trying to do? How can we be helpful? And we would ask questions. We were catalysts, but we were like the coach. We were not part of the team. We
Okay.
were, sometimes I called us outside agitators. We didn't want anybody's job. We weren't giving them money, so they didn't need to be nice to us to get more money. And at the same time, they weren't paying us. And we had to keep showing up until they started to trust us. So, and that's why it was so special, because we really were helping them to build it for themselves. And so when we left at the end of the year, it wasn't like, oh, it's over. No, it was more like, we did this stuff while they were helping us. Now we can keep doing it ourselves. And personally, I'm still going to Muskegon a few times a year, but we're like your aunt. We're not your parents. We don't pay for you. We don't punish you. We're like your aunt. She has your back. You can tell her the truth because she still wants to help you. And everybody needs that kind of support from people who have, quote, no vested interest, but still care, because that's what love is.
Yeah. And planting seeds also. And that's what you're describing.
Yes.
Planting seeds, right? Or teaching people to fish rather than
Watering
giving them
seeds.
fish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, helping them to build their own fishing schools,
There you
because
go.
that we're trying to make something that will last, even though we won't last.
Well, and that takes us back ultimately to this idea of term limits. So, Esther,
Yes.
on that note, let me thank you so much for your time today. Again, a tremendous privilege and honor to be able to speak with you. I am so overjoyed to be able to showcase your work to my audience. Let me close by asking, what is coming up for you in the first few months of 2025? We just hit March, so we're only a quarter of the way into the year. And what do you see in the news headlines? Do you have any predictions for us?
Um, more, more craziness, more complaints, and I hope some more solutions and some more constructive thinking about everything. And for me personally, writing the book, which is not so much here's what I know, but here are the questions I'm asking and some possible answers.
Wonderful. Esther, thank you again so much for your time today, ma'am.
Thank you.